The Golden Stallion here with you for another Sovryn Rewind. And this is another one from 2014. A lot of these were from 2014. So, but having fun releasing these, and from the feedback I get from the patrons, you're having fun hearing them, enjoying the blast from the past. You get to hear some of my past audio work. In fact, you really get to see a progression of the complexity that I took, that I take the intros to the show and, all of the all of that, how the show opens, everything. I mean, I certainly would continue to take it to higher and higher levels. Sometimes I'd have to scale it back. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun, and a lot of you have really enjoyed this. So this Sovryn Top 8, as you probably already noticed by the title, is the Top 8 original series episodes of Star Trek. Now, I recorded this, and not long after I recorded the Top 8 Next Generation episodes, which is probably the one that more people would be interested in hearing, because not everybody's as big a fan of the original series as I am, or as many Trekkies or Trekkers, depending on what they wanted to be called at the time, were. So, but I have something very special. Like I said, I'm not just rehashing for you, okay, old content. Or recycling, I guess is the term I should use. I'm not just recycling old content for you here, okay? For the Next Generation Top 8 that I did originally in 2014, I am going to do something very special with that. So we're going to have a very special opening that I guarantee you're going to want to hear. I don't know how long exactly it's going to go, but I guarantee you're going to want to hear it, because I might have some guests on, and it'll be cool. So, but with the original series, now, it's important to understand that there's not, first off, my top 8 for my favorite episodes within this series probably wouldn't change, and it's tough to pick 8, frankly. Like, it's really tough to just, pick 8 out of, all the episodes that there were. The one thing I might honestly have changed would be there's some Star Trek Continues episodes, which, of course, we've talked about Star Trek Continues many, many times, particularly in the Patreon-only Star Trek updates. There's probably a couple episodes of Star Trek Continues that I would put in my top 8 of the original series if I were to, include them as being what their real purpose was, which was to be like a season 4 for Star Trek the original series, or maybe a season 5 if you want to count the animated series as maybe a season 4 or something, which is, in my head canon, it kind of works out that way, so that's fine. But like Lolani, I probably would have put that. I would put that in this top 8, frankly. But here, look, it's important to understand the original series. It's funny because, I was only, so when the Next Generation came out in 1987, I was only like six or seven. You're like, really, 6 years old, because I was born in 81. So I was only 6 years old. But even then, I was fully well aware, partly because of my dad and his friends, who were all, major Star Trek fans, that they were very skeptical of the Next Generation, because they could not imagine. It's like, what the hell? They would literally say, what is Star Trek without Captain Kirk? Like this. That was anathema for them to even consider. Oddly, it seems to have turned, the wheel is turned, because now I think most people think, wait a minute, what is Star Trek without Captain Picard? Like, what is Star Trek that isn't the Next Generation? And maybe Deep Space Nine gets some special veneration with people. But in my opinion, sadly, a lot of people really don't respect and appreciate the original series for what it was, what it is, and what it always will be. What it means for, I don't just think science fiction. I think for entertainment in general. This is, Star Trek paved the way for pretty much everything. Granted, before it, you had the original Buck Rogers, the original Flash Gordon, Buster Crabbe, all that. Captain Video, you could go down the list of all those shows. Granted, those paved, their own paths and allowed Star Trek to even be attempted. I understand that. But Star Trek, was something else, and the original series really was something else. And it has a bit of a bad rap. I think Kirk has this, kind of reputation for being a womanizer. It's in my opinion, it's untrue. It's just, that's like a cultural meme now. There's a lot of things about this show that are absolute cultural memes and have been for decades. I mean, they really have, and where they're not exactly true. So I think a lot of people aren't willing to give it a fair shake. The other thing that people aren't willing to give the show a fair shake over is that they say, well, but it's so old. It looks so old. Well, understand that when you buy it today or when you watch it on TV, be it on some kind of CBS affiliate or something, or if you watch it on CBS All Access, or if you buy the Blu-rays or something like that, 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, you will see what are now special editions, where all of the special effects shots have been completely redone for a television series. That is so unheard of for anything. I mean, anything remotely like Star Trek. Doctor Who doesn't get this kind of treatment. I mean, yeah, they kind of like help bring to life scripts with animation, stuff like that maybe episodes that were lost to that. But I don't know of any real classic show. Like, they're not doing this to Lost in Space. They're not doing this to, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, as much as I would have loved that. They're not, even though a lot of that was black and white. They're not doing it to Sea Hunt. They're not doing it to, I mean, you go down the list of shows, like another show I'd love for them to do it. And in fact, there was a trailer a long time ago that somebody wanted to do it. People wanted to do it to Battlestar Galactica, and this is back when the special editions of Star Wars was kind of a thing. And what they would do is particularly for the first episode, Saga of Star World, they would add in a bunch of a lot more Vipers, the starfighters in Battlestar Galactica and everything. But really, nobody has ever officially done this sort of thing. I mean, again, it's unheard of. So you don't have to worry about, the camera quality, perhaps, or the colorization of the camera. Not that it's colorized, but as in the palette that the camera can put on display, or in how it puts it on display. Yeah, maybe that looks old. Maybe the props can look a little old, But 2 points on that. One is that, look, okay, those things look old. None of the effects look old anymore. They look great. The Enterprise looks awesome. All of that looks fantastic. It's a beautiful way to watch the show. The argument that the special effects are cheap doesn't really fly much anymore. The idea of everything else looking kind of old, including maybe the props or something like that, I challenge you. And it's interesting the way that people watch the original series. Now the original series seems to be not the first thing that people watch. It's the last thing that they'll watch. They'll watch it even after Enterprise. They'll watch Next Gen, then they'll watch DS9, then they'll watch Voyager, and if they can get through that, they'll watch Enterprise, and then maybe they'll watch the original series. That seems to be the order of the day. None of this even talking about Discovery, of course. I think, and I've made this point many times, and I'll make it again. I don't recall exactly if I said it in this episode or not. That you're in the Sovryn Rewind that you're about to hear, but when there's the season 4 episode of Enterprise, of Star Trek Enterprise, In a Mirror Darkly, where they go to the Mirror Universe, or where it takes place in the Mirror Universe. Nobody actually travels to the Mirror Universe, which is unique for when they usually do this sort of episode. Like right now, Discovery's in the Mirror Universe, right? And it's fucking awesome. But when they find the USS Defiant, now not the Defiant from Deep Space Nine, but the Defiant from the original series, from the season 3 episode, The Tholian Web. Okay, when they find the Defiant and they go on board, it's amazing. After watching so much, all that other Star Trek that all kind of has a similar design language, like the LCARs and the panels and everything, or kind of the proto design they did with Star Trek Enterprise and all that. It's amazing how advanced all the blinking lights and switches look on the bridge of the Defiant, because it's effectively a Constitution-class vessel, just like the original series Enterprise. I mean, it's remarkable, actually, just how goddamn, futuristic that looks. So I think that depending on the order in which you watch Star Trek, the original series can actually look very advanced. It can look very futuristic, far more futuristic than maybe any of the other shows. And I think that's really interesting when it kind of plays out that way. So yeah, the original series, it's a shame that it has this reputation that it just doesn't deserve. I mean, and there's not a part of its reputation that it does, or that it really deserves. I mean the negative reputation, as in, it's infamy. Like the effects are cheap. No, not anymore. Kirk's a womanizer. No, not really. That's a cultural meme. And most people don't get to experience. I mean, Spock is such a great character. Why would you not want to watch that just for him? In fact, a friend of mine, she had never really watched Star Trek at all, and she started with the original series, and she thought it was brilliant. Like she was instantly hooked, and I think she's still binge watching it right now. So I haven't heard from her for days. It's just, Star Trek has taken over her life, and great. But But anyway, the original series is still so solid. I have honestly and I'll probably talk about this more during in the opening for the next, or the new opening, the Patreon, Sovryn Tech Patreon only opening for these Sovryn Rewinds. I'll probably talk about it then, but I've recently, I've always, up until the past few years, I've really always been a bigger fan of Kirk. In fact, we might talk about this on this month's, on January's Star Trek update. There was a poll done on StarTrek.com. They do these polls at various points. And the poll was, the question for the poll was, who do you think is the most confident captain? And who do you think won that? Well, I remember I asked Stephanie when we were on our way to a Japanese hot tub, and she said, "Oh, it's Picard all the way, no doubt about it. It was Picard." No. It was Kirk with 42%. Picard had 29%. I mean, 42%. StarTrek.com, I mean, the people that voted, they said, no, Kirk is the most confident captain. And when I read that, I was like, well, okay, so I don't feel so bad about thinking Kirk was the best all these years, because obviously, and that's just one metric, and it's subjective, of course, but and it's a fictional character, obviously. But I thought that was kind of cool and very interesting at that, and we'll probably talk about more about that in the this month's Star Trek update. So, but yeah, I always like Kirk because of, and maybe it is the confidence, just the bravado, and not like the overly, toxic male kind of bravado, just the bravado, the cowboy style where, it's fix the problem and take names later. You know what I mean? It was just really, he just had that total badassery to him. Now, Picard, of course, now I'm a bigger fan of Picard now. In fact, I get a few too many people telling me that I'm like the anarchist Captain Picard. No, I'm not. I'm honored, but I wouldn't begin to say, just because I'm bald doesn't mean I'm Patrick Stewart. But anyway, with Picard, I appreciate more of that kind of warrior poet style of his now. And just his, I don't know, how he can come out with, just there's certain points where suddenly he will raise his voice and be super stern, out of nowhere, and it just grabs your attention and you take him serious as a heart attack. I really appreciate his style. But I do love, and in fact, one thing I really loved is in Voyager, where Janeway would reference Captain Kirk in that time of Starfleet, and she'd say, oh, it was a lot easier back then, those cowboy days where captains more or less did what they wanted, etc. And I always thought that was nice that she would pay homage to Kirk, and really appreciate kind of his command style and how he operated. And of course, Kirk was a young man. Through most of the original series, he's just in his 30s. So yeah, and also, look, the original series movies are so great. The motion picture is so awesome. Now, if you didn't, I did an entire ranking. You might want to go back and listen to this if you're a Star Trek fan like me. I did an entire ranking of every Star Trek film. That is, you can just look for the, when you're on Patreon, you can look for the Star Trek tab on the left-hand side under the post tab on SovrynTech.com, which is the Patreon page. And you can find that where I ranked every Star Trek movie. I think overall, the original series Star Trek movies are just better than the Next Generation movies. First Contact was great, and I love Insurrection. I think Generations is fine. I enjoyed Nemesis, unlike a lot of people. I don't really have a problem with them, but I just think the original series movies are just phenomenal. They are so a cut above. They have tremendous messages involved with them. It's not just Star Trek for Star Trek's sake. They kind of have a point. Star Trek 2, of course, is, raw action. But Star Trek 3, I think, had a point. Star Trek 4 was a lot of fun. Star Trek 5 even had some of the best points. Captain Kirk is I love the whole speech that he gives, where he's like, I don't want to get rid of my pain. I need my pain. I just, badass. Star Trek 6 has, an amazing message. Star Trek 1, of course, is in my opinion, Star Trek's finest 2 hours, because it's the singular 2 hours where they don't actually shoot anything, or at least Starfleet doesn't. The Klingons do their share, and V'ger does to a degree, but Starfleet doesn't for once. Thank you. It's a peaceful organization. We'll fucking act like it. So, yeah, I think a lot of that always led to me liking Kirk just a little bit more, than just edging him out over Picard, because that's the age-old question. Do I like Kirk, or do I like Kirk more, or do I like Picard more? So for a long time, I gave it to Kirk. I give it to Picard now. I don't know. I appreciate that style and everything, and just a lot more now. So, but yeah, this is a show, look, if you never watched the original series, maybe this will inspire you to, because this is a show that had tremendous, even, something else, another bad rap that it gets is the miniskirts. And I've talked about this at various points as well. Look, the miniskirt uniforms that the women were wearing in this show, you have to understand, that was absolutely rebellious, revolutionary, culturally revolutionary at the time. Like, now you look at it and like, oh, okay. I mean, everybody wears miniskirts now, right? Well, not everybody, but you know what I mean. Like, now it's normal. It's not something crazy to see. At the time, that was far out. Like, that was wild, to be doing that. That was, seriously, I know you wouldn't think it, but look into the history of the miniskirt, and it is positively tied in with women's liberation. Absolutely. And, sure, it was sexy, of course, but then it was also giving at a time when it wasn't necessarily, women didn't exactly have permission to express their sexuality in perhaps the fullest forms. And in many ways, they still don't, that's why we have free the nipple movements and everything. Okay. But at the time, that was absolutely about women's lib. Like, I don't think people appreciate, and you don't need to hear this from me. There's plenty of women, feminist writers and others that you can read from. Okay. But that Starfleet uniform, the original series uniform, more than any other, in my opinion, and granted, feminism is something that continually evolves, right? But it is maybe the fullest expression of feminism, at least in Star Trek, maybe in science fiction in a way. I mean, we could get into like post-genderism or post-gender stuff within science fiction. That's all of that's other conversations. But I'm just saying that this is not like, there's nothing about the miniskirt Starfleet uniform that is somehow exploitive. It's the exact opposite, and that was on purpose. And Nichelle Nichols admitted, I mean, you can ask the people involved. I mean, they loved it. They were so excited that they got to show off, show themselves off and display themselves in such a way and so freely. To say nothing of the fact, I mean, certainly the amazing thing of the cultural diversity, the human diversity that was on display on the bridge. You had a black woman, you had a Russian guy. Eventually, you had your Asian guy. I mean, the whole thing, like that, all of that stuff was absolutely revolutionary. This is a revolutionary show, and that's really why I think that CBS and whoever else, well, yes, it's to make money, but also why they were willing to take the time to do all the major restoration, special effects redos, and everything for this. So if you maybe you haven't watched Star Trek the original series in a few decades or a couple of years or a few years or something, rewatch it, because it's not like watching a whole new show, but you can definitely like enjoy it a little bit more when these phaser shots are going off or whatever, or whatever's happening, and it looks a little more legit and a little more interesting. So please, do it. All right, and maybe this will inspire you, because this is a selection of my top 8 original series episodes, and you could start off with these, because that's the other thing too. Like the original series didn't. There's two. In fact, if I really want, the Cage is on here because I love that episode of The Cage. I think that's such a sexy story. But while there is a chronological order to watch this in, I should bring this up too. Recently, the way that they have boxed this, the way that they air it and everything, they do not air the episodes in chronological order. They air them in the air date order, which means that the first episode that generally you watch is, I think, The Man Trap would be the first episode, even though really the first episode would be The Cage, then Where No Man Has Gone Before, then The Corbomite Maneuver. Now they're completely out of order. But they're based upon the air date in which you saw them, which I guess feels good for nostalgia, but I like having them in chronological where, like, all right, when does this story take place? When does this episode take place? And you watch them in that order. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you want to rewatch it, is maybe you want to see it in chronological order, or maybe you want to see it in air date order. That's totally up to you. Back in the VHS days, they released them in chronological order. So that's what I'm used to watching them as, because growing up, that's how I watched them. Usually was on VHS, or if, the local Fox network would have it on before they would play The Next Generation, the latest episode of The Next Generation or something. So yeah, chronological order, that's a good way to watch it. But the beauty of the original series too is that really you can, like, the episodes don't exactly reference each other. Not exactly. I mean, I wish they would. Like, that'd be nice. But the amazing thing is you can watch this show really in any order. You can watch any episode at any moment. There's no there's no real origin story. Like I said, there is a chronology. There is a first episode, as it were. But even then, the first episode with Kirk, which is where the chronological first episode with Kirk, which is where No Man Has Gone Before, he's already captain of the Enterprise. Like, I mean, there's no real origin story here. You just kind of pick up and go. And I think that's part of its appeal, is that you can watch it at any given moment, and, you know, in any order, really. And you can just enjoy it, you know, and you don't have to know a whole lot. And also it helps that all of these characters are themselves cultural memes that, you know, you probably already know everything about anyway, right? Like, it's like going to see a Star Wars film. Oh, Darth Vader's in it? Well, I know who Darth Vader is. Even if you've never seen a Star Wars film, you know, you can kind of appreciate it. So that's another nice thing about the original series is you don't have to watch. You could watch this top 8 first, and then you could go and watch the rest of it. Maybe you'd be inspired after that. So it's totally up to you. It's not a unique show, but a rare show that is able to really pick up like that. But anyway, one of my favorite shows of all time, no doubt about it. Not my favorite Star Trek series. There was a time where it would have been, but it not my favorite Star Trek series overall. I probably have to hand that over to, and boy, now people aren't going to respect my opinion anymore, but I probably got to hand that over to Voyager, which just a couple days ago, I think, celebrated, 27 years on the air? I mean, amazing. Well, no, it wouldn't have been that. 20-something, because Deep Space Nine celebrated 25 years this year, which is just amazing. Talk about making me feel old. Which also, by the way, I never did this originally. But so while I don't need to update this, I will complete the series out, and I will do a new top 8 in 2018. I will do a new top 8 for Deep Space Nine. I will do a top 8 for Voyager, and I will do a top 8 for Enterprise. And I don't know that it makes sense to do a top 8 for Discovery right now. I might do a top 8 perhaps for the animated series, which I'm a huge fan of. We'll see. We'll figure out how that goes. But definitely DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise, I will certainly chalk those up in pretty short order. And a lot of other great stuff still to come out in January. Believe me, some of it might shock you. I'll let the music ride this one out, and I will see you on the other side.
Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn, early 21st century anarchist, creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Check. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the golden stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now here's Brian.
Woo! The Golden Stallion, the master of the triple black arts, here for you for another little special. And this is just a little special. This one's just for fun, okay? Much like episode 99 really was just for fun. Fortunately, in our more skeptic age, nobody, went all War of the Worlds on me. So anyway. But got a lot of great, a lot of people messaged me, emailed, had some great reviews for episode 99. I'm really honored that you very much enjoyed it. And of course, this special it will be released just before episode 100, so do keep an eye out for that. I know, the past couple weeks, maybe past 3 weeks, I've been releasing the newest official episode, not one of the specials, but the newest official episodes a little later on at night than what I usually like. And that's mainly just because I'm putting a lot of production into some of these episodes. That won't always be the case. We'll get back to a regular schedule probably after episode 100, but I make sure you've got plenty of content. And of course, here's some content that is actually coming off of some emails that I've gotten recently. So, and also, slightly inspired by the lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I's Halloween dress. Yeah, we had costumes, and they were both Starfleet uniforms. And so also, some people said, wow, I love all the original series quotes that you put into the show. In fact, there was one, I even used one in episode 99. Imagine that, Star Trek still being relevant in 2099. And I do use it often because obviously the original series of Star Trek, and that's what this is, folks. This is the top 8 classic, the top 8 original series Star Trek episodes, in my opinion. And these are, I'm going to kind of buck some trends, like Trouble with Tribbles isn't on here. So, but it's a very formative show to me. It was, one of the first things I can never really remember watching at like 6 years old, because when Fox had just sort of become a network, now it's one of the big four. At the time, there used to be only the big three, which was CBS, NBC, and ABC. Then Fox came out of nowhere, with Married with Children and all the rest. And what was it, Tracy something? Anyway. So they would, Fox, to fill in a lot of slots, and this is what any network does, they will air, syndicated television, or they will air classic television, which in this case, that's how actually I got to watch the original Batman series, how I used to watch Happy Days, all kinds of shows, was that in the 80s and all the way into the 90s, Fox would just air old shows. And of course they would air syndicated work as well. And that's how I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation, but nothing really compared. I remember very well, watching at an exceptionally young age, ABC was having like a Saturday night movie. This used to be the way to watch movies before VCRs were really such a big deal. Of course, my father was very much on board with VCRs and has been, was recording stuff seemingly for decades. But with the, I remember watching an ABC Saturday night movie special, and it was Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And this was before I saw a single episode of Star Trek anything. Okay. And so I'm watching this movie, the motion picture, and still, albeit within various rules, and I've talked about these rules in other top 8 specials, other than like various rules of, if a movie is part of a series, I don't want to call it my favorite film, because it requires some backstory, or it requires, it's not just standalone. But if that rule didn't exist in my mind, Star Trek: The Motion Picture would stand the test of time as my favorite movie of all time. Tops Dune, tops The Matrix. It tops them all. Gladiator, you take your pick. It beats them all. Okay, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, in my opinion, is the perfect, almost the near perfect science fiction film, if there is a perfect science fiction film out there. Speaking of which, I am doing the special for 2001. Okay, so some people said they wanted that. It's going to happen, and I'm going to have the Disney special come out as well. So those are all both coming up. I got great content, of course, already recorded, ready to be released. So anyway, but let's get back to Star Trek, shall we? So Star Trek: The Motion Picture, it's perfect, and it's perfect Star Trek. Okay, because what Star Trek, even in the original series, let's just pretend that all that existed at the time was the original series. And in fact, at the time that I saw the motion picture, The Next Generation was just into production. Okay. And so that didn't exist yet either. The best thing you had was Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4 as far as the most recent things out there. And so if you only had the original series, something that constantly got talked about in the original series was how Starfleet is this really peaceful organization, and how we believe in peace and we solve problems without violence, and how humanity has advanced so much, in which in many ways, according to the show, and the script writers, it had. But in many ways, it hadn't. Okay. Now, this is despite the fact that I'm not, necessarily opposed to the what some would consider a post-scarcity, a post-scarcity universe or galaxy or world or organization that Starfleet clearly exists within. Okay. I'm not saying that that's somehow necessarily an impossibility, whatever. But The part that is ridiculous is that it still has a government, it has the Federation Council and the Federation President of the United Federation of Planets. I think that's insane that exists. Okay. But granted, in the original series, the Star Trek universe, the Star Trek lore, not Data's brother, the Star Trek lore wasn't really set into place. Okay. Now, the original series started from 66 to 69. Okay. And you know what? I'm getting way off track. The point I wanted to make is that, yes, it's ridiculous that it has governments, but even though Star Trek kept preaching this nonviolent, rhetoric, guaranteed every time phaser shots would be fired, proton torpedoes would be fired. Like, it's the rare episode where that did not happen, where there was not some kind of, and I get it, it's TV. There's got to be some degree, or there doesn't have to be, but the bean counters would like there to be action. Okay, but that was the amazing thing about Star Trek the Motion Picture, and I think I've said this on Sovryn Tech before, maybe years ago, but is that Star Trek the Motion Picture, the only people that fire shots are the Klingons, which is a warrior race, so no shit, okay, and the bad guy, the quote-unquote bad guy, V'ger. Starfleet never fires a shot, except for at an asteroid, which doesn't that only make sense? If you have an asteroid that's creating a wormhole that you're about to crash into, aren't you going to blow up that asteroid? Of course you are. So, that's the thing, is that it is a genuinely non-violent film, by and large, and that is an amazing feat. And I think Star Trek the Motion Picture, I think that's the reason it's not popular, because what is widely regarded the greatest Star Trek movie of all time? Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And that is also, of all the movies, I think it's fair to say, maybe next to Star Trek VI, which is then also considered the second best of the bunch. It is the one that is the most action-packed, starship battles and, all this crazy shit happening. And I think it just goes to show even just how little Star Trek fans have evolved, perhaps, in their ways of thinking. So, but Star Trek really was, and now I want to get into talking about the original series here. Okay, Star Trek really was a remarkable and unique thing to hit television. Now, I know Harlan Ellison, of course, who I have the utmost respect for, makes the claim that Star Trek at best was mediocre, which didn't say much for the rest of television because he admitted most of that was crap too. Okay. And, a lot of people say, well, Star Trek kind of took all the thunder from the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone's the greatest thing, since before there was sliced bread, because sliced bread is not a great thing. And yeah, I'm very sympathetic to that idea Twilight Zone is amazing. I love the Twilight Zone. I can watch episodes of that over and over again. I used to do the whole Sci-Fi Channel thing where they'd play every episode on New Year's Eve. They do a marathon for 48 hours or whatever. And, there were times where I would pull as much of that as I could, believe me, I get it. Okay. But Star Trek really did change things, and it has there's something very unique about it. And I think it is the attitude that Gene Roddenberry came to the table with the show. Now, some people, there have been some documentaries recently with like Herb Solow and all these guys and even Gene Roddenberry's son, where they talk about, that whole like Gene Roddenberry, great visionary kind of thing with Star Trek, that wasn't really true. And I'm open to a lot of that. But regardless, the one thing I think that is, there's two things that I think are true for Star Trek. One is that Gene Roddenberry made it for him. Okay. He was making what he wanted to see, which I totally respect that. And I think if that's not your attitude, if your attitude is, I want to make something that's going to sell, that's annoying to me. Okay. And, but, cause and I'm going to talk about this during episode 100, where the reason, and I've talked about it before, the reason I do Sovryn Tech is because I want my opinions heard and because I'm making the show that I would enjoy, that I want to listen to. So I respect that, and I think that comes through the bulk of the original series of Star Trek, minus season 3, which of course he wasn't involved in. The second thing that Star Trek really, where it really shines and the attitude that I think it brings is really important. And this is, and you can listen to direct quotes. There is in fact, speaking of Star Trek the Motion Picture, they re-released, this is over a decade ago. They re-released a 2-disc set of the soundtrack for Star Trek the Motion Picture, which the soundtrack never had a good release. You had an LP release and there was a CD, but it was rough shit. And Jerry Goldsmith's score, the god of score masters, I think he's better than John Williams. And unfortunately, Jerry Goldsmith's gone now. But anyway, Jerry Goldsmith, this great release of the soundtrack. And in the second disc, they re-released this LP that was released in the 70s that was all interviews. Okay. And you can listen to this. I'm sure it's available on YouTube somewhere or whatever. You can find it. It's called Inside Star Trek was the name of it. And I think it was released in like 77 or something. And on that, they have some recording of him talking at a convention. And Gene Roddenberry says, with Star Trek, we had an idea. No, not Wagon Train to the Stars. Shut up. I get so sick of hearing that phrase. And hey, did he copy, Irwin Allen and all this stuff? Yeah, maybe. Okay. So, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Fantastic. So Gene Roddenberry says, we had an idea that the person on the other side of the screen, meaning the television watcher, the person, you watching TV, was intelligent, that the person on the other side of the screen was not stupid. And I think that's where Star Trek really, really shines. And I think that attitude really shows, is because these were really smart scripts written by some of the best in science fiction's history. These were really, they didn't bother to explain, blah, blah, a lot of this little stuff, or they assumed you had an idea of what was going on. And so they allowed you to get to the meat of the action of what is happening. And it allowed for greater depth, and it really does show. And that's so gone now, I think. The fact that the person on the other side of the screen is treated as intelligent. I think that whole philosophy in entertainment creation has gone the way of the dodo. And that's a shame, because it was so rare in the first place. There is, really content creation. In fact, there's a great Ursula K. Le Guin recently received a writer's award. And of course, she's a phenomenal, she wrote The Dispossessed. A lot of great anarchist science fiction works. She talks about how science fiction used to be considered a joke, and it was considered a joke until people realized that they can make bank on it. But that's the thing, is that all people are making now are shows and works and media production, whatever, media commodities that, appeal to a mass audience, and they're not actually, making an art. They're not respecting the art of what it takes to create great stories or, make great points. And she talks about how it's going to be really important in the near future that there are writers, and this includes, script writers, whatever, that there are writers that remember what freedom looks like. And I think that's why Star Trek really still stands out, is because, granted, yes, I know the socialist, blah, 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 whatever people are going to fucking complain about to me. You think I don't know? How many times do I have to quote Star Trek and Sovryn to where you realize, wait, this guy knows this shit about Star Trek. Okay, I get it. I know the problems, but that doesn't change the fact that it did give and continues to give a message of hope, a message of the fact that humanity will go on instead of wipe itself out. That is so rare to this day. So, with that message of hope, I want to talk about it, and I want to talk about the top 8 episodes. Again, keep in mind, the original series went from 66 to 69. It was 3 seasons. Gene Roddenberry left in the 3rd season. or, I mean, his name got slapped on, but it was, you can tell in a lot of ways it was a very different show come the third season. And I don't think actually on my list, on my top 8, there's a single episode from the third season. Now, that doesn't mean the third season's bad. It was Spock's Brain. Great episode, sexy episode, quite frankly. But it's not in my top 8. Okay, and other ones that are not going to be on here are some of the biggies, like Trouble with Tribbles is one that a lot of people run to. I think the Corbomite Maneuver is another popular one, as well as the Doomsday Machine. I mean, there's a lot of popular episodes I'm not going to get to. I'm just doing 8 of them, okay? And we're going to get into them. So let's do it, and this is just for fun. You know what I mean? If you want the hot tech news and all that stuff, you got episodes that come out every Saturday. In fact, it's ironic, real quick. I came to the realization that my tech show comes out on the one day that the Twit network, of course, run by Leo Laporte, and that I listen to incessantly. It's the one day that they don't really come out with any new content. Yeah, they have a couple shows, but I mean, it's none of like their big stuff. So I like to think of myself as the anarchist Twit, So anyway, this is just a special. I toss it out there. If you don't want to listen to Star Trek, that's okay. You'll have episode 100 tomorrow. Coming out on Saturday, and every Saturday there's an official episode of Star Trek where I talk, or not official episode of Star Trek, an official episode of Sovryn Tech where I talk about, what's going on and what it means to you and what you can do about it in the tech world and otherwise. So, okay. All right. So let's get into the top 8. Here we go. And number 1, we'll start with number 1, or technically number 0. And this is The Cage. Now, I said that the show ran from 66 to 69, and this is accurate. 79 episodes strong. And what you actually had, though, was, and this is a rarity that anybody that knows the history of the original series of Star Trek, knows about this, is that it got a second pilot. But the second pilot is when William Shatner came on, and most of the people that you know and love as far as the cast of the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk and all the business, came there, except for, actually, Dr. McCoy wasn't in that one, but that's another story. So, but you had one before that was done in 64 and, finished in 65. And amazingly, NBC more or less says, okay, look, we realize you got something here, but you got to change it up. This isn't enough. But the original pilot, that being called The Cage, which did not have William Shatner, it had Jeffrey Hunter, who is most famous for playing Jesus, really, in Jesus of Nazareth. He comes on as Captain Christopher Pike. And everything more or less, like the Enterprise looks more or less the same. There's like the Bussard collectors look a little different on the front of the warp nacelles. There's little differences here. The phasers aren't phasers. They're actually lasers. The communicators look pretty different. The uniforms look more or less the same. There's not a whole lot different aesthetically. There's not a big difference there. But the attitude definitely was different. Because the attitude was pretty serious, pretty somber. In fact, the best way I could compare it is really not to say that the original series overall wasn't very serious, even though some people want to say it was campy. By and large, they're insulting third season episodes when they say that, in my opinion. But it was really serious. And the best comparison I can make is if you ever saw Airwolf season 1 and then you saw Airwolf season 2. It's like season 1 was serious as a heart attack. Season 2, I don't know what the hell they just started doing. Or like Viper, if you remember the show from 94, Viper. And actually that show went like 3 seasons. You watch the pilot movie and even the first season, and this is serious cop drama. And then you get into the second and third season and suddenly you lose a lot of the science fiction elements. Viper doesn't transform that much and it ends up just becoming a very mundane run of the mill show. So that's kind of the comparison, but I guess Viper's not the best comparison because of course Star Trek never became mundane. It always had something amazing to talk about. Even in the third season, like Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, where you had the guys, actually the guy that played the Riddler in the original Batman series, they have the white face on the left side, but then the other species on the planet has the white face on the right side, and so it's racism, even though it was a little I guess one could make the argument that show was a little too blatant in its message or whatever, and so they consider that cheap or weak. But again, in the 60s, this was a big deal. So anyway, so you had this first pilot, The Cage, with Jeffrey Hunter, and a slightly different cast. In fact, you had Mr. Spock. He was still there. Leonard Nimoy was there. Of course, he smiles in this episode, which most people, that understand Vulcans would be like, well, damn, that's weird. And that's, again, throughout the entire original series, a lot of things were still getting kind of set in stone. They were not, like the United Federation of Planets wasn't really named. In fact, there was like a United Earth object. I don't know. They had some kind of like UESCO or something in one episode. I think it was Return of Tomorrow where they list that off. But this came out and, was released, but it was really good. Like I said, it was really hard edged, but it was good. It was good because of that. And it was a nice, serious Star Trek. And you got to understand, this wasn't seen The Cage, okay, which parts of it were seen in a two-parter in the first season of the original series. And those parts, there was a two-parter, it was the only two-parter in Star Trek, the original series history, which was the Menagerie. They use this footage, okay, to kind of make like this courtroom drama with, at the time would be, I think, Admiral Pike, not even Captain Pike. So, but this is where all that comes from. And it finally got released like in 89. I think it was like 86, 88, somewhere around in the late 80s. This finally got released. No one ever saw this in its complete form. Okay. And it was originally filmed in black and white. Some of it was color, or, a lot of it was kept as black and white. And so you could watch like this amalgamation where you could see the color parts from the Menagerie. And then, all the scenes that weren't in the Menagerie when you're watching The Cage were in black and white. And then, of course, eventually they released a fully colorized version of it. And that's, usually what most people know about today. And so it had the reason that I love this episode. First off, Captain Pike is really cool. I do like his hard edge. In fact, he has this great point where the doctor is coming into his quarters and the doctor says, it's like, well, there's two people that a person will tell anything to. He's like, it's a psychiatrist and a bartender. He says, and right now I don't want to be a psychiatrist, so I'm your bartender. And he pours him a drink, and hands him a drink. And, he's asking Captain Pike, you sound really tired. And Captain Pike says, you bet I'm tired. Tired of, making all these decisions, tired of deciding who lives and who dies. And, you really feel the weight of the chair of command, on the Enterprise. And now maybe this episode wouldn't be as good if you didn't have the other three seasons of the original series to compare it to. Maybe in that regard, it sucks. But when you compare it to the other three seasons, this feels like amazingly, even though they're only filmed like a year or so apart or a couple of years apart, it feels much older, as in like older in the history of the Federation or older in the history of Starfleet. Okay. Not necessarily older as in, wow, it's like they made this one in 1942 and then this one, it's clearly a product of the 60s. It's nothing like that. It really did. After the fact, hindsight 2020, there's no way they planned for this. At least I don't think. And no one's ever talked about that they planned for this. Okay. But if you watch them now, damn, I mean, does it really feel like a much older Federation than what you're used to seeing with Captain Kirk? And there's a whole lot of, there's kind of an interesting, there's a lot to really pick apart with The Cage, because it is about, the Enterprise, going to this planet where the Talosians are. It's Talos 4. And these Talosians have pretty much, their mental capacity. In fact, they have these huge brains, huge heads, and their mental capacities are just, through the roof. They can create any illusion, but they're just that, they're illusions. And in fact, because they can create literally anything, their race has become stagnant. And so they've become pretty much, like their planet has turned into a zoo, where they're literally collecting species from all over the galaxy and, studying them, trying to figure out what makes them tick, what gives them their drive. In fact, it's very much like a proto version of the script for Dark City. I mean, right down to the Talosians do a bit of tuning. Okay. So no one's calling each other Mr. Quick or Mr. Hat, but it's very much like that. In fact, I half wonder if the writer of Dark City didn't, say, well, let's expand on this idea. So, that's what a lot of it is Captain Pike, exploring his humanity in the episode, and it's really good. And of course, then, he has a female lead as well that he ends up in a lot of very sexy situations with. In fact, there's a point where you get the first introduction to the Orion animal women, which if you watch Enterprise, the Enterprise is the last Star Trek television series that was produced that ended in 2005, and was, like in the last season of that, it turned a lot of what you knew about the original series completely on its head. Okay, because in The Cage, they talk about these Orion animal women, which they're green and from the planet Orion. Okay. And they are like supposedly just these very subservient, and just seductresses, and all this business. Whereas when you find out, and they're just dancing and, ready to get it on at any given moment. Like I said, the episode The Cage, that's another thing, is it is incredibly sexy, especially if you think about what could have happened in that episode with the Telosians. Oh man. But anyway, you find out in Enterprise, in the show Enterprise, that the Orions, the women are actually in control, and they are just, more or less, they've hoodwinked the entire, Alpha Quadrant, or the Alpha and the Beta Quadrant, into thinking that somehow they are, subservient or whatever, when actually they can more or less get inserted into whoever they get sold off to, and they end up taking over and helps Orion and everything. And so the men are actually the servants to the women, even though I guess at some point that kind of changes again, but that's another story. So The Cage, it is a very different Star Trek. There's really no other Star Trek quite like it. And I recommend, if you've never seen it, to watch it. But do watch it after the fact, after you've seen the rest of the 3 seasons of the original series, or at least a few episodes. You need to be familiar with Captain Kirk to really appreciate Captain Pike, in my opinion. This raises a lot of questions. Like, take Star Wars, for instance. Is episodes 1, 2, and 3, which of course came out after episodes 4, 5, and 6, are they actually really good if you never saw 4, 5, and 6? I wonder. Now, I don't think anyone would ever say that they're better than 4, 5, and 6. And actually, I love episodes 1, 2, and 3, but I know, popularly they're frowned upon, or at least 1 and 2 are. And I wonder if you didn't have that initial story of episode 4, 5, and 6, would episode 1, 2, and 3 be amazing? Maybe. Anyway, so that's it. The Cage, very easy to watch now. It gets regularly aired at various points whenever, someone's showing off the original series. Which has been updated a couple times. There was the original series, Sci-Fi Channel actually did a really big deal when they finally got the rights to air it, which took them forever. They did a special edition where they had cast members talking during it and all this stuff. And you really find out that, boy, the set of Star Trek was, or at least the cast members and even the rotating cast member, whoever, it was, a rolling orgy. More or less. Gene Roddenberry was trying to get with Nichelle Nichols and Michelle Barrett. That's another thing, too. Actually, I'm glad I thought of that. And, of course, William Shatner was sleeping with tons of the extras on set. But anyway, the Michelle Barrett, who ended up being Nurse Chapel in the original series and then ended up being the voice of the computer in Star Trek The Next Generation, as well as playing Deanna Troy's mother, Loxana Troy, in The Next Generation, she ended up getting married to Gene Roddenberry. Okay, and she became Michelle Barrett Roddenberry. And she actually played the second in command in The Cage, which was maybe the biggest reason that NBC said, no, you need to redo this show. Because she was a woman in charge. That's a huge no-no in the 60s. And kudos to Gene Roddenberry for appreciating a powerful woman. And boy, she was. She could take charge. And they never really gave her a name. They just called her number 1. And maybe that's a slight at women. I don't know. But that was really cool to have a female in charge back then, because before, women were just very much the damsels in distress. In fact, she even wore pants, which much of the rest of the original series, women were constantly wearing these very sexy little, not a jumpsuit, but they're their uniform was, ended off at a skirt and showed off plenty of leg, which, of course, boy, when the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy wears one of those, whoo. Yes, sir. So, anyway, let's just move on. Let's get to the next bit here. So speaking of sexy, of a show being sexy, number 2 on my list for the top 8, and these aren't in any particular order, is The Naked Time, as George Takei very famously said it, Naked Time. And this is an episode where essentially this, PSI 2000 or PSI or Psi 1000, whatever virus, infects the crew of the Enterprise from this other, station that they find. And this episode was rehashed and redone very well, actually, and was the second episode of The Next Generation ever in season 1, which they called The Naked Now, where the same thing kind of happened. It was a nice way to attach The Next Generation to the original series, let you know that, this happened here and it's happening again. So we are related as shows. So that's kind of important for The Naked Time to be that, because it was really showing that relationship where Captain Kirk, for the very first time, gets mentioned on The Next Generation. So that's pretty important. But it was a fun episode. It was definitely, boy, if Gene Roddenberry was doing it for him, this is one of his episodes where he's like, yeah, I'm going all out with my fantasies, baby. And, more or less, the whole crew of the Enterprise gets drunk. And a lot of their deepest stuff, and they start living out some of their deepest fantasies. And Kirk has to, really, keep his hard edge going during it. And that's just it. It's just a fun episode, to see Sulu running around with a foil and his shirt off. And of course, George Takei he's just in incredible physical shape at the time. And, to see that and just everybody having a wild time, and to see Spock crying. There's, Spock, like his human side, because of course Spock is half Vulcan and half human. His human side comes out, and you see him cry, and he talks about a lot of his, his really deepest thoughts. And I think that's part of the really powerful aspects of the episode. I certainly, when I was really young, I definitely related a lot, to Mr. Spock, because I really wanted, I liked being that really smart kid. I was going to say smart guy, but smart kid. And, I saw going around school, even, we're talking elementary school and beyond the junior high and all that, I see a lot of people that were, being smart is ridiculed. I was a nerd. And Spock was definitely, he was your household god of your patron saint, of nerddom. And, yeah, so to see him really lay out some emotions in many ways, if you were a huge fan of Mr. Spock as a child, it gave you sort of the excuse to, to let your emotions out. And, I think, and this kind of leads me to, I want to get into kind of a side thought here about Star Trek, the original series. I think a lot of parents, especially then, fortunately, there's a peaceful parenting, evolution happening as late. But I think a lot of parents back in the 80s and the 90s really just wanted to get their kids out of their hair because the economy was great and they could even go out and have a good time. And so, a lot of times they would tell their kids, okay, yeah, here, no, just watch TV, or here, no, yeah, I'll get you a new video game. And yeah, go ahead. You do that. Don't worry. And that, to replace the parenting. And honestly, that's certainly what happened to me. I mean, I became obsessed with Star Trek at a really young age and with books and video games and all this stuff, just because, it wasn't force fed to me, but it was given to me in place of the part that the parents should have been there for. It was put in place of their empathy. Now, knowing my parents, I'm far happier to have the ethics of Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock than I am theirs. Okay. If that's what I got raised with, that's a hell of a lot better, than what most parents at the time were espousing. And I'm not saying, I think there's plenty of great parents out there, or not plenty, but there's a lot of great parents out there and they've been out there for a while. Nobody knows about them because there wasn't an internet. Okay. But anyway, I don't think that great parenting just suddenly came out of nowhere. I think that's ridiculous. there have been great parents, albeit in an extreme minority, in the past, but mine were not that. And so they, fed upon me all this entertainment, but fortunately some of this entertainment had a lot of really powerful things to teach and did not have bad role models, by any stretch. And that leads me to another point. We'll get into the rest of the episodes. We got a little while. I'm not going to let this episode go too long. Okay. But that leads me to another interesting point, is that I don't know when exactly it happened. Shirley Temple being the exception, perhaps. But I'm not sure when the heroes on a show that kids or young people or whatever, which I think Star Trek was originally, perhaps more marketed to in any case, adults certainly weren't taking it seriously. In fact, especially in the 80s and 90s, most adults treated it as a joke. But I don't know when children's heroes became children. Like originally, that's all it is now. There's no kid show, to the best of my knowledge, where every main character is an adult. And I think that's kind of weird. Now, I just got done talking about, how peaceful parenting and, how parenting and people are damaged, blah, 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 blah. I know. Okay. But at the same time, like it is kind of strange. Like even, I think I remember the first show was My Secret Identity. Back in the early 90s, where the hero was actually a teenager. And then Nickelodeon kind of started doing that. But before then, a lot of the heroes, they were all in their 30s, or they were all, maybe in their 20s or whatever. They were all older. They were all full grown adults. And I wonder about that sometimes. If, not that I want people to necessarily grow up by any means. Okay. But I think that there really is sort of this, and entertainment today doesn't really help at all. There really is this kind of just this glorification of immaturity. Okay. And so I'm not really even saying anything about age, but there is this glorification of immaturity that is really, really weird. And the kids don't get it either. Like they don't get the scam either. Because it's funny, because most kids will say, oh, you adults, you don't get it. You're old. This is past your time. This is our generation now, blah, blah, blah. But that's the thing is that, kids, while kids weren't originally the heroes either, kids also are not the ones, up until the YouTube generation, are not the ones producing the content. It's adults producing the content. So if adults, there's this huge, paradox that if adulthood isn't cool, but adulthoods are the ones that are telling you and producing and funding what's quote unquote cool. Does anybody else see the problem there? So anyway, I got off kind of on a side tangent there, but it's interesting, that I wonder how much you can tell. A lot of people say, well, you can tell so much about a person by their musical tastes. I wonder how much you could tell by what shows a person watched when they were younger, and as far as, what that says about them today, perhaps. And I wonder if the television show had heroes that were full on adults as compared to heroes that were just children. I wonder what that says. So anyway, total side tangent. My apologies for that. Let's get on with the rest of these. The next one is Arena. And this is a pretty famous episode. Okay. Arena is a really, really famous episode. And what this is where Kirk takes on the Gorn. Okay. And the Gorn is this lizard, and Kirk is, they both get transported to this planet by the Metrons, who, because they don't want this huge battle to occur. And so they're trying to, and this is one of those episodes where I talked about earlier about how they constantly talk about peace. We don't use violence. We use peace. But Starfleet never does it. This is one of those episodes. There's another one too, where they deal with the Organians, but with the Metrons, where the Metrons like make them, put Kirk and the Gorn against each other. And it's like, no, you're not going to kill, hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people are not going to die over this. You're going to settle this 1-to-1, captain versus captain, that being Captain Kirk and the Gorn captain. and you're going to go at it. And so they get, transported to this planet, and actually, both crews get to see what happens, and Kirk and the Gorn, the Gorn is constantly chasing after Kirk, and the Gorn is this huge lizard creature that's very, very powerful, definitely superior in physicality to Kirk. But Kirk finds all these various minerals, like he finds sulfur, diamond, bamboo, all these different things. And finally he comes to realize, oh, wait a minute, I can make a gun out of this. And so the brains win the day in this battle, in this one-on-one battle on this planet. And Kirk fires off the gun, this really rudimentary bamboo type gun. I mean, obviously it's not bamboo, but you know what I mean. And injures, all it does, because the Gorn's just so powerful, it injures the Gorn. Okay, and the Gorn is prepared to kill Kirk multiple times. Like, Kirk is really fighting for his life here. And so Kirk grabs this really sharp stone. The Gorn's down, dazed, confused, injured. Kirk grabs this really sharp stone, is about ready to just jab it through the Gorn's face. And, he just stops and he throws it aside. And it's such a beautiful moment in Star Trek. It is one of those moments where, granted, at the end of the day, their message of peace does stand up, because Kirk says, no, I won't kill him. And he yells it out to, to the Metrons and just keeps saying, it's like, no, I won't kill him. And then one of the Metrons appears and is just amazed and says, and pretty much says, your species actually has a chance because you've shown the trait of mercy, the advanced trait of mercy. And you got to understand this, the species that transported the Gorn and Kirk there are this incredibly technologically advanced species. And they were just so amazed, to see this, to see mercy, or empathy even getting shown. And it's a beautiful moment, and it's a great lesson, to really show. And I like the point it's trying to drive home, is that mercy and empathy are the advanced traits, not all your technology, not your ability, how efficiently you can kill another person or alien, but in how you treat one another. That's where the real advancement in a species is, and that's where the real respect, perhaps, from one another should come from. A powerful episode. The Arena, it stands as popular, in my opinion, for great reasons, because it does have such a tremendous message to share with people. So, so that's the Arena. That's definitely stands tall on my list because, of course, as many know, and I've recently heard some other liberty-minded people start saying this, but I only have two rules, and that is, or two directives on my part, and that is, you do what you say you're going to do, and no killing. No human being. There's never anything worth human beings dying over. Okay. Or persons, I should say more accurately, because perhaps humans aren't the only persons. So moving on with the next episode, this one is another very popular episode, and in fact has to do with, what we mentioned earlier, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And this is the original appearance of Khan, that being the episode Space Seed. Really popular, really well done episode. It definitely, and in fact, talking about humans advancing, that's one of the things that, so the Enterprise, or one of the things that this episode deals with, because the Enterprise finds this really, this DY-100 class starship. Okay. Folks, I'm not running off of any notes here, by the way. I'm shooting all of this from memory. The DY-100, starship that or not even a starship, it's just this vessel that they find out there. And they look into it and they find out that it's more or less a sleeper ship from the 1990s. Now, of course, that bit of history obviously was dead wrong. This is also the episode, or should I say, I guess you could say this is also the episode that Star Trek Into Darkness was based off of, the most recent Star Trek film. But anyway, that's another ballgame. So they find this, and they find there's a bunch of humans in there from the 1990s. They awaken, first off, they awaken one of them, that being Khan, and then they awaken others. And the problem is that, the Earth was in such turmoil in the 90s that there's a lot of records missing. Okay, it gets spotty around there, which really shows the importance of us developing like M-Disk technology, but that's for another episode of Sovryn Tech. You can look it up if you want, M-Disk. And so they don't know that Khan was actually this genetically enhanced human being that, ended up conquering a huge chunk of the planet Earth in the 90s and was a tyrant, more or less. Or they don't recognize that it's him. They still know about that sort of thing, and they eventually figure it out. But that's not until, far too late, when Khan has already learned so much about how the Enterprise works, about all this business. And then he ends up waking up he has like 70 other people that he awakens and they're all part of this, what was called the Eugenics Wars. And the Eugenics Wars was normal humans versus these, genetically engineered, eugenically enhanced humans. And, there's really interesting conversations had between Khan and Kirk, and you really can't help. And in fact, there's a point where Mr. Scott says this. He says, I've always had a little sneaking like for this one. And Spock is totally, flabbergasted. It's like, what do you mean? How do you respect a tyrant? And of course, Kirk says, we have the streak of barbarism in us and blah, blah, blah. And so, we sometimes we respect these people. And Khan, played by Ricardo Montalban, of later Fantasy Island fame, just does a tremendous acting job, really definitely has a commanding presence. And you I can't help, even myself, and certainly, when I was younger, you can't help but, you respect Khan. You're like, I get it. He was a bad dude, but, I kind of like this guy, and obviously, nowadays it's a bit different, but just kind of his strength of character and all that, is really something. And, and you enjoy it. And the battle also, in fact, that's the point, talking about human advancement, where Khan actually says to Kirk at a point, he says, there's, how little in 200 years humanity has changed. He says, there's been technological advancement, but how little humans have really changed. And he's referencing the fact that Khan and his compatriots are, all genetically enhanced. They're smarter, faster, stronger, more capable. And, he makes the comment that, if you improve technology, you increase a man's abilities tenfold. But if you improve man, you increase his ability 1,000-fold. And it raises interesting questions about the idea of eugenics, which is very much like what Nazism was kind of, was pushing for and talking about. And it's a conversation I think that needs to be had now, in that is eugenics, is the idea, or genetic enhancement, is that ethical? Do we know what we're unleashing when we do that? When, according to Star Trek and Space Seed, okay, you are unleashing, what Spock says is, superior ability breeds superior ambition. And I think it raises a lot of interesting points. And of course, the end of the episode is, again, you kind of do have that sneaking like, for Khan, because there's this great moment where Kirk doesn't kill him, doesn't kill his, his countrymen or his compatriots. He, more or less banishes them to a planet. And, he says, do you accept this? It's like, we can either do that or you can spend time in prison. And Khan, very, really slick, he says, have you ever read Milton, Captain? And Kirk looks at him for a second and then nods his head, knowing what he meant. And of course, it's a reference to, to John Milton, who, in his various poetry, wrote the very famous line from Satan, that Satan or Lucifer said, which is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. And so the idea that Khan would be left off on this planet, even though the planet had some pretty harsh conditions, was preferable to being, in jail with the Federation or with Starfleet. And, I mean, just a really like suave answer, you know. And at the end of the episode, of course, Spock says, you know, it'll be interesting to see what seed we have, you know, sprung here, or, you know, what we have started. And, you know, it kind of, and actually, this is where I don't like Star Trek 2. And honestly, Star Trek Into Darkness didn't help either, because I would have liked to have seen what could have happened, because in Star Trek 2, you find out that, you know, Ceti Alpha 5, which is the planet that Kirk leaves Khan and his cohorts on, is right next to another planet called Ceti Alpha 6, and Ceti Alpha 6, you know, crashes or like it explodes or whatever, and it just causes this terrible fallout on Ceti Alpha 5. And so I would have much rather have seen, instead of this, you know, this Herman Melville quest for vengeance that Star Trek 2 ends up being, or Into Darkness ends up being, I would have much rather have seen what kind of empire or society or what would have come out of Khan being left alone on that planet. That would have been amazing. And no one's ever done like, you know, kind of an alternate universe type story to really talk about it, or at least not an in-depth one anyway. Boy, that would have really been something. And like, to imagine Khan's, this is, you know, kind of my little, my little Star Trek wet dream, to imagine Khan's, you know, progeny taking on the Borg. Boy, how would that have ended up? It's interesting. It's interesting to think about. So a great episode, an episode with a lot of great lines, just tremendous acting. And there's a reason that, you know, that even though I have my reservations about Star Trek 2, there's a reason that ended up being such a great movie, because, you know, just the power of the story that, you know, that came out of it. And the Eugenics Wars, I mean, there's been books, I think it was it Greg Keyes? I think Gregory Keyes it was that wrote, he wrote like a 3-part Eugenics Wars. There was also this was really good. There was a great Khan comic book series that IDW did, not the one that was an intro to Into Darkness. That was bullshit. Okay. There was an awesome where they talk about what happened on Ceti Alpha 5, and I couldn't wait month to month for that to come out. You know, so it is the sequel to Space Seed. It is some of the best comics, some of the best stuff ever put down on comics. So do look for those, not the Into Darkness bullshit. I'm talking about the real stuff that took place right. You know, I think the series is called Rain and Hell, and it's like I think it was a 4-part, and it was, you know, just gripping, because you always wanted to know how all that went down. So do check that out. But anyway, so Space Seed, that'd be number 4. And boy, this special is running long, because hot damn, when I'm talking Star Trek, boy, can I talk it. So number 5, originally I was going to do This Side of Paradise, which, if you don't know what that is, Wikipedia is there for you, baby. But instead I want to do The Enemy Within. And The Enemy Within this is another one where it really raises some of the questions about power and authority, things of that nature. And in The Enemy Within, this is one of the the 5th episode of the entire show, which I think for most people should have, after this episode aired, people would be like, whoa, this is amazing. You know, what deep issues to discuss. And what happens is there's this transporter accident. You know, this guy beams up with the various powder on him that causes a problem with the transporter. And so when Kirk beams up from this planet that they're on, it ends up splitting him in two, like into 2 people. Now, forget the science of all this, because it's an incredible exploration into human nature. And Kirk, you know, at first they have trouble. They knew there was something wrong with the transporter. So fortunately they get Kirk on board. He feels a little woozy, and they're like, okay, let's run you off to sickbay. And after everybody leaves the transporter room, the second Kirk, the quote unquote evil Kirk, appears on the transporter, and, you know, nobody knows that he beamed on. There's no, you know, log of it, whatever. I'm sure there was a log of it, but you know, no one mentions it. And so when this happens, you get this dichotomy, and it becomes a psychological exploration about, you know, kind of good versus evil. So you have the one Kirk, because again, Kirk's more or less, I mean, it's 2 Kirks, but their psyche is split. Kirk, you know, there's good Kirk and there's evil Kirk. And it's interesting to explore the ideas, and this may be really basic psychology that could just be nonsense in light of what we know today, especially as anarchists. But it's intriguing to think about, because the good Kirk is, he has a hard time making decisions. He's weak, like he's physically weak. He can't keep track of what's going on. But he's very empathetic and very caring, and obviously makes, one could say, better choices perhaps than the evil Kirk does. And then there's the evil Kirk going around drinking Saurian brandy, actually potentially, raping Yeoman Rand. And the evil Kirk, though, you find out, well, I mentioned the qualities of the good Kirk, but the evil Kirk is the one that actually is decisive, and, he has actual good qualities, but it comes from his quote unquote evil side. Okay. Or, what one would call the selfish side. But the irony is that while the evil Kirk is very decisive, very strong, and very, knows what he wants to do and is very protective, self-serving, all that good stuff, has a good time, you find out that he's a coward, and that courage ultimately comes from the good side. It's this tremendous exploration of the human psyche, and it does raise a lot of interesting questions to look at. And there's various intrigues in the episode itself that are really, cool. And there's just it's almost a joking line now where the evil Kirk goes into Dr. McCoy's, goes into sick bay and just says to, Dr. McCoy, "Sorry, I'm brandy." And McCoy's like, "What?" He's like, and, tries to talk to Kirk about it. And then Kirk, grabs his neck, like, "I said, give me the brandy." And, nowadays it's kind of a joking thing. But anyway, that leads to another point. People make fun of the way Kirk acts in the original series in particular. People don't make fun of so much how he is in the movies, but in the original series, a lot of people think that like he was, over dramatic. His pauses were way too long or crazy or whatever. I totally disagree. I think his acting is top notch, and it's part of it being top notch is that it's so unique. You can't help but remember, Captain Kirk just because of his mannerisms, his speech patterns and all of that. I thought Shatner's a tremendous actor any way you slice it, but he really, as Captain Kirk, there's a reason that Captain Kirk is such a hero to so many, because he delivers the goods. So I think that's crap when people say he doesn't know how to act. I don't agree at all. So The Enemy Within, this is one of the, if you haven't watched any of the original series, start with this episode, perhaps, because it is just so good and what it's trying to explore and how gutsy, what kind of sack, honestly, do you have to go into this kind of depth in 60s television? And that's the thing. That's what I was saying earlier, is that I believe Gene Roddenberry when he says that his premise was that the person on the other side of the screen, that being the television viewer, was not an idiot. And this episode showed that they were going to explore some really deep shit, and good for them in doing it. So let's get on to episode number 6, because this special is actually running kind of long. Let's go to number 6. And this is The City on the Edge of Forever. Now, this is the one episode that I think, okay, you got to understand, City on the Edge Forever, written by Harlan Ellison, though greatly changed, according to Harlan Ellison, by William Shatner, and to some degree recently, I think that's been proven, but we'll get to that as we talk about this. City on the Edge Forever was regarded over a decade ago by TV Guide as one of the finest 50 hours of television of all time. And it is pretty well widely regarded as the greatest episode of Star Trek ever. I think there was a countdown that Jonathan Frakes, who played William Riker in The Next Generation, there was a countdown they did before the airing of All Good Things, which was the last episode in 94 of The Next Generation. And in that, they did a countdown of the greatest hours of Star Trek. And I think number 1 was actually was Trouble with Tribbles. That was the number 1 episode. And I think that's just nonsense, because it's a good episode, but it's not like, it doesn't tackle anything huge. I guess it's just really memorable because everybody loves the Tribbles. And Best of Both Worlds from the Next Generation was really high up in that rank too, and with good reason. That is great Star Trek. But City on the Edge Forever, I think otherwise, other than that countdown, which one could argue is pretty official, coming from where it was coming from, I think it's widely regarded as the best. And, I don't know if I'd call it my favorite episode, but I definitely recognize that, I wouldn't argue with somebody if they said it was the best hour of Star Trek. I most certainly wouldn't. To say the least of which is because, yes, Harlan Ellison, regardless of how the script ended up, did write it. And Harlan Ellison is God. Really. he's it. He's the man. Okay. And so the City on the Edge Forever, very famous, of course. Kirk and Spock go through this Guardian, Dr. McCoy accidentally injects himself with something. He goes crazy, goes back in time to, around World War II, the 1940s, before/during World War II. And somehow McCoy going back in time, well, we know how. McCoy going back in time kept the Federation from becoming, kept Starfleet from coming into existence or for becoming what it is, because I'd argue that it actually didn't stop the Enterprise from existing. But we'll get into that in a second. And so Kirk and Spock have to go back in time to stop McCoy from doing whatever the hell he was going to do. And this Guardian on the, this Guardian on the Edge of Forever, or whatever they want to call it, the Guardian that they walk through that takes them through time, helps them out with the matter and gets them in place, to do it. And so Kirk, in trying to find McCoy, they try to fit in, and in fitting in, they end up working for and working with a woman named Edith Keeler, who is, essentially a social worker before there was social workers. She runs a mission. She runs, a homeless shelter, and, more or less. And it's tremendous because Kirk ends up falling in love with this woman that Spock eventually discovers has to die. Because if Edith Keeler doesn't die, then, the future that is Starfleet that Kirk and Spock know and love will not happen, because Germany, what essentially will happen is if Edith Keeler doesn't die, Germany will win World War II. They'll build the hydrogen bomb first. Okay. And it's really powerful because, again, Kirk falls in love with this woman and then has to watch her die. I mean, this is the most tragic of stories possible. And, really a lot of these really deep emotional stories, that really, really, strike people, often involve a degree of time travel. And so I was more than happy to engage in a little time travel fun myself with Sovryn Tech in the past couple episodes. But anyway, powerful stuff. So the first thing I want to bring up, is that I would argue, and I've never heard anybody else say this, and I've never really read it, but I would argue that the Mirror Mirror universe, which amazingly also is not on this list, but the Mirror Mirror universe, which is the universe where, which gets explored a few times in Star Trek's history, where everybody's kind of evil. In fact, Star Trek Continues recently did a sequel episode to Mirror Mirror. It was fantastic. If you haven't seen Star Trek Continues, this is the original series continued. Really, it's so good. And in Mirror Mirror, everybody's like doing the whole Sieg Heil, the salute that the Nazis did. And so I'd almost argue that if Edith Keeler, if Germany won World War II, that you would end up with the future that is the Mirror Mirror universe, that's where that universe comes from. And it's now, of course, how would a Jew like Captain Kirk, actually, it's never made clear that Captain Kirk is ethnically Jewish, just William Shatner is, made it that far. I mean, hell, who knows? But if that were the case, right? So, but that's an interesting thing that where Star Trek kind of tied its own little, connections that definitely wasn't on purpose, but works out really well. So I thought that was cool, but there's a lot of drama around the drama that is City on the Edge Forever, the episode. And that is that apparently Spock was more the hero of the story in Harlan Ellison's original script. And William Shatner was livid that this was the case. And so, like two Jews do, they argued with each other back and forth. No. William Shatner ended up, pulling his weight around and got the script changed to where Shatner was more the lead in the episode. And this has been, some people say that that's not how it went down. Regardless, just this past month, there was a 5-issue comic book series by IDW, again, that really, really sewed this up. And they had Harlan use his original script, and they made a comic book version of the original Harlan script of City on the Edge of Forever. And it's great. It is so good. And I mean, they're both very good, but admittedly Harlan's, the City on the Edge Forever comic book definitely ends off with the moral message and kind of the moral high ground, as to where the television show is just an incredibly powerful, albeit sad and tragic love story. And how the comic book ends is with this message of, because Spock is totally confused, because it's not McCoy that ends up going back in time in the comic book series. It's just this other guy who deals drugs on the Enterprise, which that alone is nuts. When you read that in the first few panels of issue 1 of Harlan's City on the Edge Forever from IDW, you're just like, wow, this is a normal Star Trek. There's drug dealers on the Enterprise. And when you, this guy ends up, kind of ODing or something. And he ends up going through the Guardian, through the portal, through the time portal. And he creates all this problem. And so, a lot of the story is the same. Kirk and Spock have to go back. Kirk does fall in love with Edith Keeler. But you find out what happened is it's the same thing. Just like in the TV episode where the plot point that changes the future is McCoy stopping Edith Keeler from dying and thus letting the Nazis win World War II. In this one, it's just this drug dealer guy who, who's totally played off in the comic book as, scum of the galaxy. And he ends up being the one that saves Edith Keeler. But of course, just like in the television show, that's the whole tragedy of it, is that Kirk and Spock have to keep this drug dealer from saving Edith Keeler. And this is how the comic ends off. And it's really powerful because Kirk, Spock is saying to Kirk, it's like, I don't get it. It's like, I'm half human, but I don't get it. How does somebody who's so self-serving, like this drug dealer was, how does he end up being willing to run in front of a truck? Because that's how it happens, is that a truck hits Edith Keeler. How does he end up being willing to jump in front of a truck and save Edith Keeler? That doesn't make any sense. It's against his psychological MO. And Kirk says to him, more or less, he says, there's so many times where throughout humanity's history, we perhaps should have handed it over to the cockroaches or to the sharks and just put an end, to humanity. He says, but then every once in a while, out of nowhere, the absolute worst of us does the great deed, does that amazing thing, that amazing good act, just out of nowhere. And then when that happens, you can't help but say, no, you know what? Let humans keep going for the dream. Let them keep trying. And boy, I thought that was good. I thought that was just fantastic. What a the episode's great. The comic book's amazing. They're both good. But do check out that comic book if you can. And for Christ's sake, give Harlan some money. He's just one of the best humans we've ever had. And, actually Harlan Ellison recently had a stroke. And I guess he's doing better now, and I've talked about it on Twitter and some other areas. I got to get kind of close to Harlan Ellison when I was younger, and I really treasure those times. And I don't know how good I'd feel about him dying. And I mean, he's old. He's pushing 80s. And anyway, still putting out great stuff. Still wiping the floor with some good old fashioned human wisdom. that we really need. So anyway, okay, let's move on. Next episode, number 7. We only got 2 more. This will be over. Maybe we can do this in an hour and a half, maybe less. The Omega Glory, and this is an episode that's pretty cheesy. In a show that everybody describes as cheesy and campy, this one is pretty decently cheesy, and its message is certainly, you certainly get hit over the head with the message. It's not subtle, like much of Star Trek was, and like good science fiction should be, in my opinion. And the Omega Glory is about, there's this planet, they're trying to find like something, what happened to this Starfleet ship that just, stopped responding, stopped transmitting, data or telemetry, whatever. And so they go to this planet and they found out that the ship crashed there, and they find the captain of the ship and they don't find anyone else alive. And this, so, they turn it into a rescue mission, but come to find out, there's the civil war happening on this planet between these two very human-looking species, and that is one of them's called the Yangs, and the other are called the Coms. Now that alone should, and the Coms have kind of this Asian look to them, and the Yangs are very very almost Viking in their look, and you kind of get, when you start to think about it, Yangs, Coms, Yankees, communists, you get the point. And so there's a civil war that's just been going on forever and ever between these two groups. And you find out that they're actually, all that's nonsense. And the captain from the ship that crashed is just, he's crazy and he's trying to help the Coms. It's just nuts. And so, but you find out towards the end of the episode that the Yangs and the Coms are descendants of a space expedition that crashed there, because the Yangs, in their holiest of holies, in their holy building or whatever, they have a copy of the Bible, the Christian Bible. They have a copy of, they have a copy of the Constitution, and they have an American flag. And so unfortunately, if you watch this now, the episode does kind of feel like some American propaganda. Okay. and actually, speaking of Harlan Ellison has gone on record often saying that Star Trek was really just a cop show, and it was, America going around the galaxy kind of, forcing its way of life onto people. And there may be some validity to that, but regardless, that's not the topic I'm getting into here. But anyway, but there is kind of, admittedly, in your little bit of patriotic heart that you may have left, this episode does kind of have a moment, and there's some humor in it too, because there's, in their Bible, there's actually pictures in this Bible, which I don't know where the hell you get pictures in the Bible. That's a topic I'll save for the show I'm going to be doing about religions. That's a whole other podcast. It's a whole other, anyway, that another story. Let's get Hypercronius out there before I start talking about that. And, but anyway, in the Bible, there's a picture, and Satan looks like Spock, which was a commonly leveled thing against the original series, is that, hey, you're this character, this Vulcan here, looks like Satan with these pointy ears and these pointy eyebrows and all this stuff. He just doesn't have the tail. Which is, that's really how genuine Americans felt in the 1960s in the real world, not on the show, in the real world. That's mind-boggling to me, regardless. So that's kind of funny, but the Yangs keep saying like these holy words where they're saying like "e plebnista," and they keep quoting this, and Kirk finally realizes what they're saying after he sees the Constitution, and he's like, "We e plebnista." He's like, "No, we the people." And so he starts, and so it's really impressive because, and this is actually where the message is kind of good. Because he starts, he wins this battle with the crazy captain, and he's like, he takes the Constitution. He says, "You don't understand what you have here. You don't understand what's going on." He's trying to put an end to the Civil War. He says, "This isn't what you call e plebnista." He says, "It's we the people." He says that, we've seen these words on many planets, but none of them have been, quite said in this way, with this much power. And and he's talking about, he starts reading it off the Constitution, and Kirk for a Canadian does a hell of a job, or Shatner for a Canadian does a hell of a job of reading it off. And he says, and this is what's great. He says, you don't understand. It's like these three letters at the top, we the people. He's like, this has to apply to everybody, including the comms. These rights are for everyone, or they don't mean anything. And that's where it's so different from your standard fair American patriotism, and where it's such a beautiful message. Not that I'm one for rights. I think rights theory is a very weird, specter of the mind. But in general, that the idea that, what the rules or whatever gets laid out for one person applies, should apply universally. There should be whatever, equality under the law, right? All this stuff. In an anarchist realm, we're not getting into that. We're talking in general. But that was amazing to hear somebody say that, you know what, the Constitution, because even if this was American propaganda, I wish it was American propaganda that was real. I wish it was American propaganda that people actually listen to. The idea that these rights in the Bill of Rights has to apply to everybody. We've got to treat everybody like they're a human being, not just Americans. And I thought that was actually a pretty great message. It was an over-the-top script overall, but, the discussion of freedom and the idea that these things have to apply to everybody. It can't just apply to a few, it was a really powerful message. So I like the Omega Glory. Always have. It was always a really a fun episode, including Spock gets to do some pretty wild Vulcan mental tricks that I thought was pretty wild. But anyway, we're to our last one. Awesome. We're on the last one. And the last one is maybe the most viewed episode of Star Trek ever that I ever watched. And that is the Gamesters of Triskelion. Now, this is the episode that I think most, and I saved the best for last, because I don't think anybody would expect this to end up on anyone's list, but it totally ends up on mine. And the original reason that it ends up on mine, it was the first time we got to see up Uhura's skirt. Really. There's a point where she kind of falls over. She has all right. So let's get into the plot, right? The Gamesters of Triskelion, you find out that there's they get beamed down to this, Uhura, Kirk, and Chekhov get beamed down to this planet, just taken from the ship. And they are given these kind of slave collars, and they have to fight to the death based upon wages of these ethereal voices that they keep hearing. And there's other species there that they have to fight in a gladiatorial style combat. And if they don't, if they don't comply with what the Gamesters of Triskelion want, they have to, or they end up getting choked or, put into tremendous pain from these collars. So they're fighting for what they call the providers. That's what these voices that they keep hearing. They're fighting for their entertainment, and they're constantly waging I bet 20 million quatlus on the newcomer, and all this stuff. And Kirk ends up, of course, falling in love with one of a woman named Shauna. Who's actually played by a stunning actress in that episode and has quite the go-go suit going on. But he falls in love with her, and he's trying to get back to the Enterprise, and the Enterprise is, of course, trying to find them, and it, bit of mystery around all of that. And it ends up where Kirk finally meets the providers, who are really in control of everything that's going on this planet. And it's just these three brains. And, he argues with them. He talks with them, tries to wager, getting back to the Enterprise, getting his freedom. But he doesn't just want his freedom. Obviously he wants it for his other crew members, but he wants it for everybody there. And he pretty much, gets them to agree that, if I lose in combat, then you'll do, I'll do everything your way, and, we'll have the whole crew of the Enterprise beamed down, and you're going to have more gladiatorial combat than you'd know what to do with. Okay. But he says, but if I win, it's you go by my terms. And so they agree to it, And, they're so intrigued, these three brains, and these providers, they've become brains because like their technological abilities and all that have just come so far that all they are is mental now. They even said at one point they had bodies, but now they're just these brains, protected by various technologies. And so Kirk wins the combat. Okay. And it's interesting throughout, the whole episode, there's this constant message of Kirk trying to talk to these other, gladiators, for lack of a better word, about, haven't you ever wondered what it's like to not fight anymore? Haven't you ever wondered what it's like to have real freedom? And that's really interesting, to hear that kind of conversation. But then, when he wins and the providers have to go by his terms, he pretty much says, set them all free. And he makes this really great point. He says, I think you'll find it far more exciting to help them grow in freedom, and through their own methods and their own ways, and, to help them build their own society, than it will be, to just have them constantly killing each other. So essentially the message being is that it is far more difficult and exciting to create than it is to destroy, to try and make something work than to just, through whatever means, than to try and, have everything go through violence and just all this gladiatorial bullshit. To grow up is far more engaging and exciting. And I thought that was a really cool message. That the idea of, because I think there's a lot of attraction to this in that, physicality is everything, yay, football and all this stuff. I'm not necessarily knocking football, not to say that I wouldn't knock football. But like, a lot of, you watch like UFC and all this stuff. And it's interesting that so many people are just so engaged and so excited by by this kind of combat, as to where the far more interesting thing may be to see people, how do we solve problems without resorting to violence? And without, even having a gun in the room. And I think that's something that's not explored at all. And it's certainly not explored in science fiction. And I have to, tip my hat, my Bitcoin hat, to Star Trek for having the guts one more time to fancy that notion, to forward it. What is it like? Is it more exciting instead to just watch silly, to watch, this brutal entertainment, or is it more exciting to see something get created, to cultivate peace? Oh, I love it. It's a phenomenal episode all the way around. Not to say that I don't enjoy the action. I mean, seeing Captain Kirk, kick a little butt. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate that. I love it. But just that whole notion of building, a community instead of, creating a spectacle, a gladiator spectacle. Really powerful stuff. So anyway, I think that's our top 8. I think that's about enough of that. This has gone longer than any other top 8. But that's because, boy, I could talk Star Trek all day. It really is. Star Trek and Star Wars are really top dog. And, Stargate, I have Babylon 5, obviously. That's a whole other story. But I mean, there's just a lot of messages. There's a lot of, especially in the original series. The Next Generation did a great job of it, too. Deep Space Nine, not so much. Voyager was Star Trek for Star Trek's sake. I mean, there was some degree of morality being shown in that, but the original series and the Next Generation, they really had lessons to teach, and they got to sneak them in, as Gene Roddenberry often says, and a lot of science fiction authors say, we get to sneak in so much truth, hard truth, because it's coming from somebody with like a funny shaped forehead, some alien or something. And that's the power of these stories, is that they kind of sneak in that morality with you, And the original series is powerful. There's never been anything like it. There will never be anything like it again. There are shows that are very similar to each other, but this is one that exists without compare. I will do a top 8 about my favorite Next Generation episodes. I could do one for each Star Trek series, but I will do a top 8 for the Next Generation episodes in the future, because there's plenty of great episodes to talk about there. And there's certainly plenty of episodes of the original series that I didn't bring up. I love Amok Time. There's again, This Side of Paradise was another great one that had a very powerful message to it. A lot of these episodes have a lot to say. And I think, actually, and it's fun when you get to watch the new Star Trek Enterprise, which that's what they ended up calling it by season 4. When you get to watch that show, because that took place before the original series, you really get some interesting insights into what's going on in the original series. So if you actually watch all of these, you get quite a very different picture than just the simple messages and stories that you're, not to say that they're simple, but just the upfront stories and messages that you get. In fact, this is I'll end off with this. This is a really interesting point. There was an episode called In a Mirror Darkly. We mentioned earlier the Mirror Mirror. In fact, I love the Mirror Mirror episode of the original series too. But we mentioned Mirror Mirror. Now there is In a Mirror Darkly, which is in the 4th season of Star Trek Enterprise. And in that, this is the amazing thing, in that they find, and this is from another episode of the original series called the Tholian Web, they find the Enterprise is a Constitution class vessel. Okay. And they end up finding one of these Constitution class vessels in the time of Enterprise, which is like the 2150s or 2160s, 2150s. And when they go, again, this is taking place before the original series. Now, when you watch a television show from the 1960s, usually you think everything looks, oh, wow, we had some really silly ideas about the future, didn't we? And that looks ridiculous. All these blinking lights. Why isn't it all touchscreen? What's the deal? And this is the interesting thing is when you watch In a Mirror Darkly and you see a Constitution class vessel in that, you've gotten so used to seeing, the various like LCARS, Star Trek design language and all of that, that when you see a Constitution class bridge, you go, God damn, that thing looks futuristic. Like that looks so advanced. I can't believe it. And believe me, that'll happen to you. As before, you would think that the Next Generation looked like the most advanced or whatever, or you'd even think Star Trek Enterprise, that the NX-01 ship in that looks way more advanced than anything we could have possibly produced in the 60s as far as television goes. But when you finally see, that 60s style Starfleet, I mean, you're blown away. You're like, what? That is futuristic. Like that, whoever thought of this? It's like they have switches. We don't even have switches, and it's the 21st century. When do we get to those? Yeah. And in fact, yeah, in my future, you're going to have switches again. So, yeah, or if I had my way. But anyway, so that's the beauty of getting that whole picture for Star Trek. But the original series is a great place to start, and these were, my favorites for various reasons, and perhaps the reasons that you hadn't thought about. But that's it. I'm going to end it there. Episode 100 will be out. Don't worry. It's coming to you every Saturday. I've never missed a Saturday. Never, ever, ever missed a Saturday. Even if it meant it was Saturday on Pacific time, I've never missed a Saturday release. So be looking out for that. Got some changes coming for you. Carpe Lucem, everybody. It's good to be back on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. And connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.